Hello and welcome back to Tiny House and Off-Grid Resources, the channel where we remake, rebuild, repair, recycle instead of nipping down to Harbour Freight and buying a new one. What you're watching me do today is building the business end of a fusion reactor. Seriously, keep watching. You'll see how I'm going to take on the fuel crisis head on. Now, before you safety zealots start ranting in the comments below about me bending over and working at such a low height, do be aware that this is not me. This is my clone that I built in a previous episode, and as you know, anybody who follows my channel will know that whenever I do anything dangerous, I gather the whole neighbourhood together and we go down and we sit in the concrete bunker at the end of the street while my clone does all of the dangerous work. Yes, the clone's all operated by remote control from the concrete bunker down the end of the street, so anything that's remotely unpleasant or toxic or unergonomic is done by the clone and not myself. Now you're looking at this upside down. This is going to be the feed hopper. It's a 60 litre oil drum. I think that's 12 gallons, I'm not sure. But it's not as big as I could have made it. The fuel hopper can be made any size at all, but I wanted to make this a small portable unit, so I'm keeping everything very compact and down to the minimum sizes. Plus, of course, it's what I had lying around. Two important things with this build is that everything's got to be airtight and it's also got to be fireproof. So here I am, instead of welding the entire thing and risking distortion because I don't want this plate warping, I've stitch welded it and then I'm putting round a heat-proof fire cement which is going to seal up any of the gaps. That will be sanded off when it's dry, only leaving the cement in the recesses. Now this type of fusion reactor is known as a syngas generator. SYN, synthetic gas, synthesized gas. These are gases that are released due to a pyrolysis process. Pyrolysis is cooking something rather than burning it. It's heating to an extreme temperature in a reduced oxygen environment. It's been used for several hundred years to produce gases. The gases are then cleaned, scrubbed and piped to where they're going to be used, and they can be used for heating, cooking, driving machinery. Syngas plants, producer gas plants, have had a long and successful history throughout Europe. They were used extensively during the war years because, of course, fuel was very hard to get your hands on for privately owned or business vehicles. As syngas, producer gas plants, is such a generic name, they were often known by the kind of fuel that they used. There were wood gas plants, there were coal gas plants. Indeed, it was the wood gas that was powering so many vehicles during the 1930s and 40s. During that period, many of the European car manufacturers, such as Mercedes-Benz, Volvo and Saab, were all making their own dedicated vehicles, specially made to run on wood gas. Even today, there are thousands of people around the world who are choosing to run their vehicles from wood gas. In fact, I've just become part of an online community called Drive on Wood, where people are building their own systems and driving vehicles on wood. But more about that later. This is going to be the ash door frame. You've got to be able to get the ashes out somehow. The ashes fall down to the bottom, so this is going to be an opening, a portal into the reactor, so that the ashes can be removed. Once again, everything's got to be made really carefully so it stays dead flat and square, because it's got to remain airtight. This angle iron, by the way, is old children's bed frame. Do you remember years ago when children's beds were made out of angle iron and wire wove mattresses? This is one of those. For 10 years it formed one of the stays of my wind turbine. But when I upgraded to a flasher turbine, all that came down. I put it in my useful box, and here it is, getting another job. Because of the wood stove work that I've been involved with for years, it's only been a wee step sideways to get into the world of pyrolysation, gasification. But the people over at Drive On Wood, the internet forum that I've recently joined, have been already immeasurable help. And they're a great bunch of people from a wide variety of countries. It's been incredible to see how many people with Swedish and Norwegian names there are. But the good thing is they've all got a very good command of the English language, and they're all super helpful. And honestly, I think wood gas is in their blood. This thing is a very simple bending bar that I made up out of a long piece of heavy 2-inch angle iron, folded in half, and that gives it a springing effect which helps to hold it open, and then it gets squeezed closed by the vise on the line that I want to bend. And then with a soft mallet, a wooden mallet or a rubber mallet, I can just push the steel over on the line to give me the bend that I need. Just a quick and simple way of putting the odd bend in a few things. What I'm actually making here is the bracket that's going to hold the box of tricks. There's a few little bits of electronics that get involved in this. I'm going to have some temperature monitoring devices. There's going to be a couple of switches for turning devices on and off, and they've got to be mounted somewhere. So by putting them on a little upstand like this, they remain a little bit insulated from the heat. And because I'm keeping the thing inside but using it outside, it needs to be on wheels. Well, got Easter weekend out of the way and everybody's back at work, which is awesome because the couriers have started arriving and they're bringing me things so that I can finish this. One of them is my furnace fan. This is a proper dedicated furnace fan. It's got an external motor so that it can dissipate heat readily. It's 100% metal construction, no plastic at all. So this is designed to be in a boiler room firing a furnace. Quite expensive. This cost me 140 New Zealand dollars, and it's going to stand me in good stead whether I choose to use it on this or not, because I've got a choice of using this, or I can put in an inline bilge blower, which is used to push gases out of the bilge of boats, or I could also use this, which is a plastic version of the fan. It's a third of the price and it's 12 volt, whereas this one is 240. So I've got all these choices. I'm not going to glue any of the piping just yet because I want to experiment with different things. Speaking of piping, I'm very pleased to announce that the good people at Sticky Flanges, yeah, that's the name of their business, Sticky Flanges, These people are in Rotorua here in New Zealand, and they produce a range of beautiful mandrel bends right up to 3.5 inch in exhaust pipe tubing and in stainless, and they do a range of sticky flanges and asbestos wrapping and everything you can imagine for fabricating exhaust systems and a whole lot of stuff. I'll put a link to their website up here. Now, why am I making such a fuss of these guys? Well, that's because they made a bit of a fuss of me. Well, you see, I ordered a pipe online and I'd saved a whole lot of their products on this selling trading site. And I clicked on the wrong one and pressed buy now after I'd saved 2 or 3 of them, and I chose the wrong one. I got the wrong size pipe. When I realised the next morning, I sent them an email, and whoever it is that's in the office got back to me really quickly and sorted it all out and said, look, there is a small difference in price, but don't worry about it. And I thought, hey, that's so good. You didn't have to do that at all. First time I've ever dealt with them. And I just want to say thanks once again to Sticky Flanges in Rotorua for looking after tiny house and off-grid resources in our latest project. So this is called a combination bend, and as you can see, you've got 2 45s, you've got a 90, and you've got a really tight 180 degree U-bend and some useful straight pieces. Quite often, if you're making something like I make anyway, that is enough to get you sorted for the entire project. So I'm going to be cutting this up into sections and welding it around and doing the hot side of this system in steel, and the cool side, after it's been through here, will be in the PVC plastic.
Now, after the gas has been produced, the first place it needs to go is into a cyclone. The cyclone's a specially shaped device so that it will create a swirl in the gases, and that leaves a dead zone in the very, very centre. That dead zone allows any of the particulates, the soot and the ash, to fall to the bottom, and that'll get collected along with any condensate in that wee glass jar that you can see sticking out of the bottom.
What are you building?
The answer to the fuel crisis. What fuel crisis?
What fuel?
The one that's coming in a few weeks.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that one.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
This
Is it just going to go up in price like crazy in 2 weeks, is it?
it could quite easily just become unavailable.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, I mean, we've got...
Well, I'm not going to be able to move to Northland.
Eh?
I'm not going to be able to move to Northland. We have to stay here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have got 17 to 21 days fuel in New Zealand.
Yeah. And what about no tankers coming?
Jacinda Ardern sold our overseas reserves.
Yeah.
That's not physical in tanks. That's, we've got our name on that. Don't you sell it to anybody.
Right.
Well, she sold that. It was one of the last things she did. So we've got 0 overseas petroleum reserves.
Yeah.
We've got enough in New Zealand to last us 17 to 21 days, should anything happen.
Yeah.
Right, sorry about that. I cut a great big chunk out where Cam and I just ended up chatting about this, that and the other for about 15 or 20 minutes. Anyway, here we are back into the build, doing a little bit more cardboard aided design. This is a truncated cone transition. This is something I'm having to make to go onto the side of the bucket, which is the cyclone. And the cyclone is a device that creates a cyclone inside it, and that drops the particulates, the soot and any embers fall to the bottom, and they can be removed in a pickle jar that's attached to the bottom. And it's done by bringing the air in a rotational pattern into the side, and that creates a dead zone in the centre, and the air exits in the middle of the 2 buckets from the centre. So you can see what I'm doing here. just making the bit to cover the big gaping hole. And what I'm doing here is creating a frame to take the fiberglass door sealing rope. It's very important that everything on this device is sealed because it works under a partial vacuum. You don't want too much air getting in here. You have to control how much air you've got to get a controlled pyrolization. We don't want enough air to create a fire. It has to remain below that threshold. And here you can see that I'm just doing a little bit of wiring. I'm getting the 12-volt supply down to the fan, and above my hands you can see a water container. That water container will contain 4 litres of water that will be fed on a dripper into the air intake so that the air intake is moist. We're only looking for 2 drips of water per second, and that's just enough to stop clinkers forming. You see, when you charcoal wood, when wood is pyrolyzed in a reduced oxygen environment, it produces a clinker. And that clinker, of course, will grow and grow and grow, and eventually will stop the airflow. So you have to either break up the clinker manually, which can be done with a poker or a grill rattle, a grate agitator, or you can drip just a little bit of water in there, and that will help to reduce the build-up of clinker. And another thing it also does is adds to the chemical mix somehow and helps the fire to create hydrogen, which adds to the burnability of the gas. You see, in gasification there's 3 distinct things that you have to learn. One is how to build a gasifier, but there's no point in learning to build a gasifier unless you learn about the fuel. And so the second aspect of this is learning about the fuels and learning which fuels will work best for your situation. And of course the third aspect of running a gasifier is learning how to modify an engine, or how to use the gas to turn it into a viable fuel that you can use. So now I'm back onto that little frame that you saw me marking out earlier. That frame goes on the inside of the ash removal door and just stops the fiberglass door rope getting sucked into the gap. So it's made to very precise measurements. I want it to just fit nicely inside the door recess. So I'm just going to tack the corners, holding it down with a magnet and this big metal weight. I'll do the other end, and once I've checked that it fits inside the door nicely, I'll fully weld it and then attach it to the inside of the door and put the fiberglass door rope around there. You saw me earlier using the back of a stove for a piece of panel steel to make the bracket to hold the electrics. Now you can see me using the wrap of an old hot water cylinder. When I need a thinner gauge of galvanised steel, I quite often resort to recycled steel, because in the little town where I live you simply can't go out and buy a sheet or half a sheet of galvanised sheet steel. You have to procure it from somewhere imaginatively. Now, a few years ago I splashed out and bought the cheapest bought metal folder that money could buy. It was a Harbour Freight type Chinese folding bar. Well, I made a lot of modifications to it and improved it no end. Anybody who knows what the Harbour Freight folding bars look like, they'll know that this looks nothing like it, that it's had quite some modification, and I've turned it into something that's almost as good as a bought one. Certainly good enough for folding a little bit of 22 gauge galv. This is going to become the panel that holds all my switches. You won't see it in the final build, it's hidden inside the control box, but it just makes it so that all of my wiring can be put behind something and the switches are attached to a nice firm base and everything remains weatherproof. When gas moves from the restrictive environment of pipework and moves out into an open tank or a chamber, it rapidly expands, and as it expands, it loses heat. And you probably know that. So that's why the gas that comes out of here, by the time it's been through the condenser and the cyclone, it's lost most of its heat, and it's just a pleasantly warm gas. That's why the second side of this can be made totally out of plastic. All the pipework's plastic, and this filter canister is also plastic. It's going to have a sediment drain in the bottom, and this large 20 litre 5 gallon bucket gives me the volume to be able to experiment with different types of filter material. I'll be using wood chips, old towels, corrugated cardboard, perhaps even some net curtain. anything that can grab the particulates as they come through and arrest the small abrasive particles before they reach the engine that this is driving, because we don't want tars, moisture or abrasive particles contained in the gas getting into the engine. So this part is very important. What I'm doing now is just cleaning out the inside of the hole with a bit of sandpaper so that I can fit what's called a uni-seal. That's these rubber labyrinth vagina type seals that go around the pipe. They're particularly useful for putting pipe work into tanks where you can't get a hand on the inside. For example, a very small tank or a very large tank with no access, that you can't actually reach down inside and get to the other side of the hole to do up a nut flange. Right, I'm about to crack into one of the last jobs in the building of this gasifier, and that is to build myself a grate. Now, many people use a stainless steel pudding bowl and drill it full of holes, but you know what? A colander already has the holes. So I picked up an old colander from the dump, and I'm just enlarging the holes to make it into a grate. That fits underneath the reduction zone, which is the area below where the actual fire happens. Because this is a downdraft gasifier, the fire is turning the wood into charcoal, and the reduction zone is immediately below that. Gasifiers come in three basic types. You've got the updraft, downdraft and crossdraft. They all have their purposes. Usually the feedstock that you're intending to use, and of course, is it going to be used to produce gas for combustion as a flame, or gas that's going to be consumed inside an internal combustion engine? And that's where, in the absence of oxygen, the charcoal releases its gases. The volatile fractions are released. They mix together, and because earlier I mentioned the water injection, the water is also adding to that. So we've got a mixture of CO2, carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and under the right conditions that produces a very flammable gas. Now, to keep that gas flowing, it's vital that the grate doesn't get blocked up. So that's why every gasifier needs to have a grate agitator. You've got to keep the ash out of the grate. The ash will then fall down into the bottom and will be removed through the ash door at various intervals after the burn. You can't open this ash door while the device is in operation. So I'm greasing this flange because one day I know that I'm going to have to take this thing apart to do some servicing on it. So this is just a nice tight fit, but I don't want it galling up and rusting into one lump, so I'll put a nice coat of grease around here, which will help to keep it airtight, and which will also mean that months down the track, when I need to do some servicing, I can actually get the thing apart. Now, Now, because this thing's assembled in two parts, it'll be apparent to you by now that the wheel axle assembly can't be welded to both halves, otherwise I'll never get it apart again. So it's welded to the bottom, and once I get this in place, I'll weld two tabs to the top part, and they will be bolted to the axle frame, meaning that if I need to, I can still get this thing apart without having to grind off any welds. Right, the whole thing is just about finished. It's now time to insulate it, and I'm going to make my version of refractory cement, which is 1/3 of garden pumice, 1/3 of jib compound, which is plaster of Paris, and 1/3 of wood ash. Very, very simple. Put them all into one container. Use the minimum amount of water possible to mix it. Have I got a knife? Wait there, I'll go and get some scissors. Right, so we're going to stir that up, mix it all together. Once it's mixed, you add a very, very small amount of water, the minimum amount possible. Now I've got 1 litre of water here, probably won't even need the whole litre of water. So what I'm going to do, so I can keep an eye on how much water's going in, I'll get a baked bean tin, which is 300 ml, and we'll add it in half a baked bean tin at a time. So that's 150 ml going in. I'll add one more in. So we've now got 300 ml of water, and that's probably just about what we need. No, we need a little more water than that. Another half. So that's now 450 ml. And we're looking for a consistency stay together. That's perfect. So now what we're going to start doing is packing that around the inside of here. will shrink. You've got to remember there's a litre of water in here. The volume of that water has to go somewhere. So if we've got, we haven't actually got 1 litre, we've got 700. So we're going to lose 75 cubic centimetres. It will shrink slightly and this pot will go down so that it sits how it used to. I'm going to put this on one side and leave it for the rest of the day to harden off. We'll have a clean up and then I'm going to get on with some more pipe work.
The air inlet is all made from 1.5" water pipe, so it's nice, heavy, thick wall. The truyere itself is 1.5" cap, and that cap has 5 equidistant holes drilled in it, angled at 30 degrees, and into those holes I'm going to put in 5 1/4" nipples. They're threaded with BSP, British Standard Pipe. What I'm going to put over them is a metric ceramic shroud. That ceramic shroud is what is used for TIG welding to direct the gas, and it's not an imperial thread, it's a metric thread. But because it's not going to be under any stress, it's close enough for this to work. So these pieces will get welded into the end of this nozzle on the appropriate angle, and then the ceramic shrouds will get screwed down over each one of them.
Now this is one of the last things I have to make. This is the adjustable air intake. It's very similar to the ones that I use on my wood stoves that I've been making for the last 25 years. Just a little larger in size. Now this next part is known as a 2.5 to 1.5 inch concentric reducer. So, looking down inside the wood hopper, you can see the 5-port Truyere where the air comes in. You can see the combustion pot and the lighting port. Once I've done these 6 bolts up to join the 2 halves together and put in the lighting port and the main air intake, it's ready to bring outside. But you're going to have to wait till the next video to see how it goes.